Hi, guys. Welcome to our podcast, Heard Stories by HerZWave. We are a new community on a mission to amplify women and women identifying voices in music and tech. And today I'm so excited to have a very special guest with us. Her name is SENAIDA, an artist, producer, and sound architect whose work lives at the intersection of music, technology, and philosophy. She's behind projects like KUNST KAPUTT, an experimental AI-driven collaborative album, and Zeros Plus Ones, a radio platform that highlights women and non-binary artists in the new techno cultures. Across her work, from performance and neuroscience to blockchain and community building, she's exploring how creativity, identity, and technology can come together to shape a more equitable, collaborative, and human future for music. Welcome, SENAIDA.
Hi.
I'm so excited to have you here. I think your work is just so inspiring and so interesting. So I hope that my questions are going to be specific enough for this conversation. I will start with my first question. It's about your album Kunst Kaputt. It challenges the idea that art is broken. What, in your opinion, is most broken about the current music ecosystem, and how does this project respond to it?
Well, what I think is most broken about today's music ecosystem is how streaming platforms and algorithms have reshaped both creation and listening into acts of passive consumption. Algorithms now privilege what's already popular, things that are short, repetitive, instantly gratifying songs that often fit into these algorithmically curated playlists. And as a result, producers are also encouraged to be less creative and to cater to the algorithm by using formulas to produce these dopamine-filled tracks. These feedback loops have really flattened the music diversity and make discovery feel predetermined and push artists to produce content optimized for engagement rather than expression. But despite the billions generated by the streaming revenue, artists only really see a fraction of that wealth, with Spotify paying only, I think, 0.006 cents per stream for tracks with over 1,000 streams. And so this has turned into what once was a space of experimentation into one that I see as precarious and compromise. My album, Kunst Kaputt, responds to this crisis by using these very tools that have broken music, AI, algorithms, and automation as a mirror and critique. It is the world's first open source collaborative AI generated album, and this project transforms algorithmic processes into an act of shared authorship, revealing both the beauty and also the absurdity of our digital music economy. One of the biggest flaws in today's music ecosystem is the way streaming revenue is distributed. Under the dominant pro rata model, all subscription and ad revenue goes into a single pool, which is then divided according to total streams across the platform. So this means that for every play on your Spotify or Apple Music, whether it's a global hit or an obscure track, it feeds into the same centralized system where the top 1% of artists capture the majority of the payout. And in this structure, independent and experimental musicians are effectively subsidizing these pop superstars and playlisted content. The listener's intent doesn't matter. What matters is the total volume of the tracks that you create. So Kunst Kaputt intervenes in this system by rerouting the flow of streaming money back toward the community of creators themselves. The project invites participants to generate, remix, and re-upload AI-assisted tracks under the Kunst Kaputt umbrella. Each participant then streams these works, creating what I sometimes describe as a pyramid scheme, not for personal enrichment, but as a conceptual hack on the streaming economy. One of the other bands that I really love, Wolfpack, also did this once, where they created an entire album of 8 hours of white noise and asked their fans to stream this album while they slept so that they could earn enough money from streaming for tour. But that was almost more than 5 years ago now. And so by inflating the collective stream count of the contributors, this project can reclaim a portion of the revenue that would otherwise disappear into the hands of corporate platforms and chart-topping artists. And in doing so, Kunst Kaputt exposes the absurdity of the pro rata model while using its own logic against it. The project doesn't aim to cheat the system necessarily, but to illustrate how broken it already is. Where success depends on manipulation or algorithms rather than artistic merit or listening depth. And so by mobilizing collective participation and self-streaming, it transforms the passive act of consumption into an act of resistance and redistribution, challenging listeners and artists alike to rethink what it means to create, circulate, and add value into the algorithmic age.
Wow. That sounds incredible. I actually went on your website and I tried to like make my own versions of like your songs, and I thought that was really cool. I love like the whole idea of how you like use blockchain to record this. I think it's super cool and like super innovative. So I'm actually gonna move forward to a new question about AI, because it's kind of like an ongoing conversation, obviously, because AI has been so big in the last like year or so. But I feel like a lot of artists fear it. I was wondering what role you think it can actually play in empowering creativity rather than replacing it, because you are someone who has been vocal about using AI um, in your work or to like help with your work. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think this is something that a lot of artists are talking about now, and there needs to be continual more discussions around the role that AI plays in creativity and creative fields as well. But I don't actually think that AI empowers creativity in the real sense of the word. Right? AI empowers us to learn from the past and what is available on the internet. So it is a powerful tool that allows us to access a lot more information and knowledge than we previously could have, just like how the internet or peer-to-peer sharing was revolutionary for the information age. However, generative art by itself lacks creativity. We're seeing more and more of it appearing. In fact, recently I read a study that showed 1,000 people were surveyed on whether an image is generated by AI or generated by a human. And there's a large percentage, I think like 60 to 80% of people who really just couldn't tell the difference. And most of these works were also like computer generated art. And so this is really detrimental to people who are trying to use digital tools to bring new innovations or inspirations. For me, creativity is the process of transformation, whether that's perception, context, or meaning. And it's also inherently relational. It arises from this dialogue between people, technologies, history, and the environments. And so in this sense, it's less about authorship and more about agency within a network, whether that's how we remix, reframe, or reinterpret what's around us. Especially in the digital age, creativity is no longer confined to the individual artist. It's distributed, iterative, and collective. However, in our society, artists are pushed more and more towards creating content at scale, which results in mass amounts of AI slop, which is antithetical to creativity. So I think instead, AI teaches us a lesson, which is to value real art by real people even more.
Yeah, totally. So actually, I have an additional question about AI. Do you think it democratizes access to music making, or could it end up reinforcing existing inequalities?
Well, AI-generated tools theoretically do lower barriers for creators. Nowadays, anyone with a laptop and an internet connection can use sophisticated music-making tools, DAWs, mixing and mastering solutions, which help a lot of musicians bypass traditional gatekeepers. However, when you look at where the money in music tech is actually going, there's a crucial caveat. The underlying rights, data, and industry infrastructures are being aggressively consolidated by major labels, platforms, and large investors. And these infrastructures are absorbing AI startups and integrating their capabilities into already existing powerful business models. So this means that if access to distribution and monetization remains controlled by these large players, it will only benefit them disproportionately and flow to these already pre-existing large incumbents. So even if AI tools do enable more music creation, getting paid for your music, building an audience, and securing rights are still something that requires us to navigate a very complex system that favors those already established.
So, I have my next question is not so much about AI anymore, but as someone who's navigating both music and tech, what unique challenges or opportunities have shaped your perspective on your experiments?
um, that's a good question. My approach to creativity and community building, I think, always comes from this place of radical care, empathy, and inclusion. I use my unique perspective as a non-binary person to inform the ways in which I collaborate with other creatives based on how I would want to be treated. And this has led to very deep and trusting relationships with my creative collaborators where there are no hierarchies or systems of control. I've had to learn to assert myself in male-dominated situations and learn to be true to myself even when people act dismissive towards me. But through my work as the founder of NYU's Gender Equality in Music Club and We Are the Future, I'm very, very grateful to be surrounded by a wonderful and supportive group of artists who share this same ethos of inclusivity and plurality.
That's amazing. Zeros and Ones spotlights women and non-binary artists in the new techno cultures. What drew you to curate this space, and how does it connect to projects like Kunst Kaputt?
Zeros and Ones is a project that came out of a longstanding involvement in NYU's radio station, WNYU. Between 2020 and 2024, I was co-hosting a radio show called Classy and Sassy with my friend Jackson Waters. And in 2023, I got into DJing, and that's when I noticed that the majority of electronic music being played was produced by men. I wanted to challenge myself to create entire sets with tracks produced by women and non-binary artists. And this helped me to research artists more deeply and pushed me to find and curate sounds that were outside of what I typically heard on the radio or in the clubs. I also had many guests on the show, and every time I tell them that they could play any genre of music, but it can't be produced by men, they get really excited and take on the challenge and come up with really great mixes. At the core, both of these projects are about reclaiming agency within systems that flatten or exclude. They both use sound as a form of resistance, whether against algorithmic bias in streaming or gender bias in club culture. Instead of letting algorithms or industry trends dictate what we hear, I want to foreground intentional listening, discovery, and representation as creative acts in themselves. A lot of my work is about asking what it means to listen differently and how we might reimagine the ecosystems through which music circulates and communities can form.
Amazing. So my next question is about the future. Looking ahead, what would a fair and sustainable music economy look like to you in the next 10 years?
A fair and sustainable music economy would probably begin by redefining value, not in terms of clicks, streams, or virality, but through the depth of engagement between artists, audiences, and communities. In the next 10 years, I imagine a system where listeners' subscriptions directly support the artists they actually listen to, like Bandcamp or Patreon. Through user-centric payment models, rather than feeding a global revenue pool dominated by major labels. Platforms could prioritize transparency, equitable pay structures, and artist ownership of data, allowing musicians to understand and connect with their listeners on a more human level. I recently started experimenting with this through a platform called MetaLabel, founded by Yancey Strickler, who is also the co-founder of Kickstarter. MetaLabel allows independent artists to create releases which are rooted in fair profit distributions, autonomy, and ownership. I also recently launched my own Patreon page, where my audience can support me in exchange for previews to my music, mixes, and educational content. But beyond the economics of it all, sustainability also means cultural and emotional longevity. I hope to see slower, more intentional spaces where people can gather, whether that's physically or virtually, and to experience music as a ritual, a conversation, and care, not just background noise. Artists would be able to experiment without being penalized by algorithms and collaborate on open source creations like Kunst Kaputt, and value would be added alongside the individual authorship. Especially, I think there needs to be more of a focus around education in listening, sampling ethics, and digital labor, which could really help rebuild trust and respect in the creative ecosystem.
So what does success look like for you? Beyond recognition, with deeper goals, social impact, new collaboration models, changes in the industry norms do you hope your work will achieve?
Success for me means being able to build sustainable models from my creative work. Systems that allow both myself and my collaborators to thrive without compromising artistic integrity. I'm less interested in success defined by numbers or fame, but more in creating frameworks where art can exist ethically, collaboratively, and with long-term impact. That might mean developing alternative economies around music and technology where value circulates fairly and creatively, where it isn't dictated by algorithms or market pressures. Equally important, though, is the ability to inspire people across borders. I've been working to build bridges between communities, disciplines, and cultural practices in my work. And I find the most meaningful moments in my career have come from deep collaborations with artists whose lived experiences are vastly different than mine. These exchanges expand how I understand art, identity, and care. Success for me is about cultivating these networks of trust and curiosity and spaces where we can learn from each other and co-create in ways that transcend geography or genre. Ultimately, I hope to be part of a new era of art that is genuinely multidisciplinary, where sound, technology, performance, and philosophy can intersect fluidly, and where experimentation is valued as much as the execution. If my work can encourage others to think more critically about creativity, community, and sustainability, and to imagine a freer, more interconnected future, then that, to me, is the truest form of success.
That's great. And my final question is, what advice would you give to anyone like you trying to enter this space?
It's really important to carve out your own path. The structures which have been created in these industries were not made for people like us, and therefore don't work in our favor. Therefore, building something and finding communities who support you are really important. You can't do this alone. The music industry and social media constantly wants us to fit into these neat little boxes or labels, but that's really not how creativity works. It's about the process and the people you surround yourself with that will truly define what your art is.
That's a great advice. So this is basically the end, but I did have like super quick questions that I was wondering if you would want to answer. So who is a woman in music or tech that inspires you the most?
Suzanne Ciani. She is one of the first women producers that I discovered. In fact, when I found out about Suzanne Ciani, that was when I decided to go to school for music production, because it opened up a whole new world for me of creating music outside of my classical training.
That's awesome. So my next question is, do you have, and if you do, what's your all-time favorite album or record and why?
That's a really hard one. Right now, I have to say Bismillah by Peter Cat Recording Company. This is my partner and I's favorite record, and every time I listen to it, I remember the first summer that we ever spent together in New York. It's an album full of nostalgia, celebration, joy, and bittersweet love.
Wow, I'm gonna listen to it. If you could collaborate with any artist, living or past, who would it be?
Recently, I've been really loving the work of animistic beliefs. My friends Lynn and Mar, who live in the Netherlands, and I would definitely love to collaborate with them.
Okay. So, what's one piece of advice that you have received that stuck with you?
I didn't receive this advice directly, but I follow the spiritual teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese monk, and he says that time is life. If we view time as a collaborator rather than something that we have to work against, then creative work becomes so much more fulfilling. I don't think time is ever wasted. It's only lived and experienced as we become more in tune with our true selves.
So, do you have a daily ritual or practice that helps you stay creative?
Yeah, I journal every day. I recently discovered this app called Stoic, which has really good journal prompts. And every day I will write down 5 things that I'm grateful for. This gratitude practice has allowed me to shift my perspective and focus more on what truly matters to me.
Wow, that's amazing. I should probably do that too. Um, so actually, outside of music and tech, what's something that currently excites you or inspires you?
Lately, I've been really enjoying cooking. It allows me to get off of my devices and be fully focused on being creative in the moment and making something that will nourish my body and my soul.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.